Although I enjoyed this presentation in Catalan, pure Catalan, about the history of Zionism in Israel, and I understood every word, I have to beg your forgiveness because my Catalan is slightly rusty, so I'll use English. After Mr. Yamini's very impressive presentation on the soft side of the conflict, I will now speak about the hard side of the conflict, although I'll speak also about the soft side because those things, as you said rightly, are complementary. So my presentation will have three parts of it. Is doctrine. Well, I'll talk about Israel security through the lens of the Israeli security, the national doctrine, the security doctrine agenda, and the way it develops, how it was derived and how it's developing. So I'll talk about the classic defense doctrine and how it was formulated by the founders of the country, how the threat, national security doctrine is a result of circumstances, of environment, of history, of geography, of strategic situation, on past conflicts, on future prospects. So it's evolving all the time. And we have a dilemma now in reformulating our defense doctrine. I'll stress on that. All the information I present here is from open sources, but the interpretation is my own. I'm presenting my own views, which in Israel, some of them are controversial, especially towards the end when I talk about the dilemma. And I must say quite frankly that it's sharp contrast with what our military are thinking. It's based on an article paper which I published. I'll mention it at the end if I won't forget, and you're all invited. It's in English, you're all invited to read it if you have the patience for that. So let's go to back. Israel was declared in May 14th, 1948. I was about 10 years old at the time, but I remember it very clearly. It kind of burns into consciousness. It was established by the Zionist movement, which you heard the explanation about. What is the Zionist movement? I mean, you gave a short presentation. Actually, it's worth a conference of about 2 weeks. But to put it in short, I'd say it's a national liberation movement of the Jewish people. It was authorized by the UN resolution 1981 in November 29, 47, again, an event which etches in one's memory, which decision partitioned British Palestine between an Arab and a Jewish state. The resolution was rejected by the Arabs in Palestine, by their recognized leadership and by the people in the street, and by all the members of the Arab League of that time. Israel's legitimacy was contested and is contested until this very day. And this is the basic fact of our life, which derives our policy. Our strategic environment from 48 for a time was dictated by the fact that Israel is this tiny spot here where you don't have a space to write the word Israel among a huge swath of Arabic countries at the time. Today the Arab world is bigger, but at that time the rest of the Arab world was still under colonial rule, mainly French and British. And that was our environment at that time, with two friendly states, half-friendly states, Iran and Turkey, who were Muslim but anti-Arab, of each one of his own reason. So we had a mild support from their side, and that was our strategic situation. Look at that at the point here at the end. This very strategic point at that time was still under colonial rule of the British. The importance of it will come later, a few slides down. And then the situation became worse as colonialism retired. More and more Arab states were established. All of them joined the Arab League, and all of them joined the rejection of Israel and even active participation in wars against Israel. On the south, to the credit side, we developed friendly relations with Ethiopia, which gave us way to the south. And then the situation changed again. In 1979, we had a peace with Egypt, which reduced, it didn't take the Arab League out of the war with Israel, but it reduced the tension with the Arab League It reduced the level of rejectionism. There was no more intervention in wars after that. And peace with Jordan that came later actually opened the borders. The eastern and southern border became more or less threat-free. It changed the situation quite considerably. But on the debit side, what balanced it and overbalanced it was the rise of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is very hostile to Israel. We speak about it a little later. And the change in policy of Turkey from a very friendly state, actually an ally, not official, but was an ally, with two armies training together. Erdogan, in the beginning of the 2000s, took Turkey into a new line of new Ottomanism, which included Islamism and anti-Israelism. We still have diplomatic relations of low level with Turkey, and we are still allowed to fly over and into Turkey, but we don't see that the situation is going to improve, and if anything, it's probably going to be worse. So this is the short history of the geostrategic environment during the times until today. Just one more important thing, because we go into more details, is the routes. We need, our lifeline is the Mediterranean to the Western Hemisphere and to Europe, and the minor lifeline is the route through the Red Sea into the South Asia and the Far East and East Asia. This route goes through the Bab el-Mandab, which is now threatened by the ally of Iran, the Houthi state, non-state in Yemen. The pinning of the rejectioning of Israel, I think Mr. Yamini spoke a lot about it, but let me go try to analyze it a little more in more detail. We see it, a spectrum here, from Gamal Abdel Nasser in the 60s, whose view was to say the quotation, the very existence of Israel is an act of aggression. Against whom? Against the Arab people. This is nationalistic rejection of Israel. On the right-hand side is Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran, who is speaking against Israel, the victory of people of Palestine and the return of Ireland to the world of Islam. He is talking about from religious rejectionism. In the middle is Hassan Nasrallah, who is both a Shia and a cleric and an Islamist and an Arab. So he's talking about Israel as the warmonger in the Middle East. All the wars in the Middle East, unhappiness in the Middle East is because of Israel. It should be eliminated in order to make the Middle East a happier place. So it's neither nationalistic, not exactly Islamistic. And of course, there is a Hamas, and Mr. Yamini spoke a lot about the Hamas. Actually, maybe I shouldn't have shown, but it's an interesting speech by one of the founder of Hamas, Mahmoud al-Zahar, and it's interesting to listen exactly to what he's saying, the way he's presenting it to other listeners in Gaza. This is an official broadcast. You can see here the official emblem of the Hamas station. And this is a translation by courtesy of our site, Memory TV. The Arabs usually, the Iranians speak in two languages. They speak a different message in English and a different message in their own languages, Arabic and Persian. So Memory TV, and I advise you, if you are interested, to open their site. It's a site, you can see the translation. They take pieces of broadcast and translate it, also articles and translate it. It's very interesting, the way the Arabs are talking to themselves, to their own audiences. So with that, without further ado, let's go on.
لا نملك إلا أن نتذكر جرائم هؤلاء المجرمين عبر التاريخ.
This is a historical
ونقدم للعالم
fight against the Jews.
اليوم مجموعة من الأسئلة ونتحداهم أن يجيبوا عليها بصدق، فقد طغت المصلحة على الأخلاق وطغت الانتخابات.
Notice, election overshadow principles. This is not the main message, but the subtext is anti-liberal democracy. This is part of their values. Liberal democracy, they are against it. And actually, Ahmadinejad, the previous president of Iran said it very clearly. I quoted him in a conference in Sevilla, said everybody can hear the shatter and fall of liberal democracy. So we are part of the problem.
على المبادئ وطغت الصهيونية على كل حقيقة. نسأل العالم اليوم
It's about 4 minutes long.
من الذي ولماذا طردت فرنسا واستأصلت الكيان اليهودي المتمثل في الجيتو في سنة 1253 ميلادي؟ لماذا طردوهم؟ لأنهم مصوا دماء الفرنسيين، لأنهم سفكوا دماء الفرنسيين، ذبحوهم وسرقوا أموالهم وتآمروا عليهم، فما وجدوا في المحصلة من بديل إلا طردهم في سنة 1253. فروا إلى الشمال إلى بريطانيا وعاشوا فيها فقط 27 سنة حتى أدرك الإنجليز جرم هؤلاء الناس قتلا وبصا لدمائهم وسرقة لأموالهم، فذبحوهم وطردوهم سنة 1280 ميلادي. ونحن نسأل الفرنسيين والبريطانيين لماذا طردتموهم؟ ثم نسأل ألمانيا قبل هتلر لماذا تم طردهم في سنة 1384؟ ونسألهم أيضا لماذا طردتهم فرنسا مرة أخرى في 1360؟ ونسألهم لماذا طردتهم المجر في 1360؟ ولماذا طردتهم بلجيكا في 1370؟ لم يكن هذا مسلسلا جديدا، فالقصة قد بدأت قبل 1253 يوم طردهم فرعون بظلمه لأنهم سفكوا دماء المصريين وتآمروا عليهم مع أعدائهم، فطردهم بعد أن ضيعوا دينهم بعد يوسف عليه السلام. هل هذا المسلسل كان جديدا؟ لا. ففي بعد ذلك طردهم تشيك في 1380، وطردتهم النمسا في 1420، وطردتهم هولندا في 1444، وطردتهم اسبانيا في 1492، وطردتهم روسيا بعد التآمر على قتل القيصر في 1882، وطردتهم ألمانيا مرة أخرى في 1945. إن مسلسل الطرد مستمر حتى هذه اللحظة. مسلسل الدماء تسيل والشهداء يقضون والأبناء يحملون الراية، والطرد قادم بإذن الله تعالى من فلسطين، كل فلسطين بإذن الله تعالى. نحن لسنا أقل قوة ولا كرامة من الشعوب التي طردتهم واستأصلت شأفتهم. نحن على موعد مع طردهم.
So I'll tell you the end. Notice the theme. This is anti-Semitism, pure and unadulterated, of which the Nazis would have been proud. He's not ashamed of it. He is bragging to his own audience. He's bragging about the anti-Semitism. You don't notice that Israel is not mentioned here.
Only Jews.
Zionism is not mentioned here. Occupation is not mentioned here. The very presence of the Jews is sullying the world, and the world should be purified. He continues there towards the end. I'll tell you that when Islam wins, as you said, the Jews will have no place upon the earth. So this is perhaps the most overarching theme in this front of rejectionism. You see the nationalism, you see the religion, and you see the anti-Semitism. Altogether, this is something, yet an attitude which it would be very naive to wait for a change soon. So we have to think about a long war. And Israel is fighting a long war. It's still fighting it. Until now, we have undergone 4 high-intensity wars, 1948, 56, 87, 67, and 73. And let me say, 1948, today thinks that it was a pre-won game, that Israel was strong, the Palestinians were strong. Believe me, we won it by the skin of our teeth. On the 29th of May, the Egyptian army was 20 miles south of Tel Aviv and about 6 miles from where I live now. We had nothing to stop them with. 4 fighter aircraft and 1 brigade of infantry. That was about it. So that was the margin. The 2 medium intensity wars in 82 and 2008 were in Lebanon. We had 2 rounds of urban guerrilla inside Israel in 87, 92, the 2 intifadas, in which more than 1,000 Israelis lost their life, including children. 3 rockets offensive from Gaza, for an ongoing campaign of terror and rocket fighting, which you don't hear, it's too low level, so it doesn't reach the world media, and close to 30,000 Israelis up to now were killed, civilians, and mostly civilians and soldiers, mostly soldiers, not civilians, and more than 100,000 were injured, and there is no prospect for this to end. We expect it to go on. And with that, we'll go on, but after that, let's do a comparative profile of Israel compared to Catalonia. Our area is a little less, 22,000 kilometers, 30,000 tours. These maps are to scale. So to it will be a scale. Our population is slightly higher, 9 compared to 7.5. I hope I'm not wrong, because that I found it in the reference books. And our per capita is, we are both in the good part of the OECD. Israel, with all those wars, looks quite well. One the journalist asked me one day in my office in Tel Aviv, so with all these things, the middle face, how can you afford it? So I opened the window and said, look, it's not, we don't look so bad. We are doing quite well. And this picture is about 5 years old. Now all this skyline is filled. And on top of it all, science helped us to find gas, and now we are energy independent, and I can't believe my ears when I'm saying that. So, is Israel at peace or at war? Depends on how you look at it and what's an hour of the day. You see scenes like that simultaneously, almost every day. Here's the soldiers in the Gaza border facing Hamas, and the better in the gorgeous beaches of Tel Aviv, I recommend to all of you. There are no less gorgeous than your beaches here, and sometimes more warmer because we are to the south. And it depends. I say that Israel is a state in a country of quasi-peace, which can change very quickly and does very quickly to war, change very quickly to peace. So with that, let's now go take the background which I described here, and now it is translated into a doctrine. And it took in stages. The first defense doctrine, actually the national architecture document, was composed by Ben-Gurion, which was mentioned by you, a very talented person. He was not educated, actually, at about 2 years of university studies in Istanbul, University of all the places in the world, but otherwise he was self-didact, one of those guys who, just by reading, reached the level of PhDs, I think, at least in political science and military history. He took time, he was a prime minister, took time from his job, interviewed people for months and sat down and wrote a document which is amazing in its detail. It covered everything. Military doctrine, security doctrine, economics, society, foreign relations, everything. I will concentrate here, focus here just on the military or the military doctrine part of his observation and conclusion. And believe me, I'm doing something wrong here by skipping a lot of what he wrote. So he made this following observation. Israel is inferiority in size, and not just size, the dimensions. I showed you the map of Israel in the beginning, map of current Israel. I looked at the map, I couldn't do it, but Barcelona, if I put it here, feels about this space. This is the width of our country. So this part also is no strategic depth. not just only the small size, no strategic depth, population is small, natural resources almost non-existent. We cannot compete with our neighbors with that. And because of that, there is always a temptation for our hostiles not to make peace with us, but to try to resolve the conflict by force of arm and bring the existence of Israel to an end by force, not by agreement. On the same time, Israel will never have the capability to force her neighbors to make peace with her by force of arms. That was his observation at the time. Not everything was proved correct, but that was the observation which was actually, until this very talk about the more distant, we talk about Iran, we'll never have the possibility of forcing Iran by force to make peace with us. So Israel is destined to live through cycles of full-scale wars, one after the other, endless until something changes. And this succession of wars, Israel must win every round, not only survive it, but win it in a decisive way in order to delay the next round as much as possible. And nation building and country building should be done in the lulls between the wars. And because of that, the wars themselves must have certain characteristics. First, the wars must be short. Second, they must be fought on the enemy's territory. We don't have territory to fight on, and we can't afford the destruction of a war, because then we have to recover from it. The other thing is that we have to maintain a strong arm, but we have to maintain in such a way that it is a bearable cost in order not to burden the economy and not to hinder the nation building. Because of that, the military force will have to be predicated on three pillars. On early warning, that means knowing that having enough intelligence to warn in time. Deterrence, that means cast a deterring posture towards enemy, shows you that you are strong, show them that you are strong. And what's called in Hebrew decisions, no good English translation for that, but it means decisive victory. Victory shouldn't be just a shield. It should look and be decisive. I mean, this is a formula. How to do it is a different thing. The implementation of his doctrine since 1953 was an armed force based overwhelmingly on reservists, and this is the economic side, with a small standing army of drafted soldiers of both genders. This is part of the doctrine, to have both genders in the army from the start, commanded by a corps of professional soldiers, small corps of professional soldiers, and this is basically the Swiss model. He copied that almost word for word. The force structure itself reflects the three pillars. A powerful centralized intelligence corps, and that's the early warning. And believe me, we have a very strong intelligence corps aided. This is a military one aided by the civil side of the Mossad. All of them are very powerful. It's not always knows everything, but it's quite good. And a visibly, not just powerful ground force and air force, but visibly powerful. That's why we have to always to buy the best and the latest in order to deter the other side, actually remain in the constant state of arms race, in order to be one step ahead, in order to convince the other side not to start a war tomorrow, but only next week. Based mainly on firepower and rapid maneuver to repel invasion if there is, and move the war to the other side, to the enemy's territory as soon as possible. There is a residual naval, and his doctor in the naval was no more than a coast guard, and I think in the beginning immediately he made a mistake. You just look at the map I showed you, our lifelines, and Navy should be and is more than a coastal. This was one oversight of Ben-Gurion, but it came up from the Israeli experience, war experience that accumulated up to now came from the British Army, not from the British Navy. There was not awareness to the importance of the Navy at the time. Now, that was Ben-Gurion's observation and conclusion, which were very correct for the time. But time moves on, things change, and let's look at the main changes. From 1948-49 War of Independence, until the peace accord with Egypt, our enemies, we looked at the fronts. We had the southern front and the eastern front. The southern front, you can see it here. If I'll find the arrow, eventually I'll find it. Oh boy, I can't find it. What do I do with the arrow here? Ah, there it is. Yeah, you can see here, this is the southern front and the eastern front. And then when we had the peace with Egypt, the southern front stopped being critical. Egypt is very heavily armed, but it's not a reference enemy now. We have a stable peace agreement. It's a cold agreement. It's an agreement between governments, not between the nations, but it's peace. They have an interest in it. We have an interest in it. So we are not facing south now, but the eastern front of Syria, very powerful army, Iraq, of Saddam Hussein, very powerful army, and Jordan, that was pro-Saddam at the time, was still a threat of conventional war. And then came the emasculation of Saddam in 1991, and the peace with Jordan, which were more or less almost simultaneous, 1991, 1994, and the Eastern Front also disappeared. So if you sum up the changes 1991 to today, the major shift were the integration of the Eastern Front, actually Southern Front, Eastern Front, but on the other hand, two adverse developments. The rise of the non-state actors along our borders, first Hezbollah and then Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the south, and most overarching threat of all, the emergence of the Islamic Republic of Iran, committed officially in its agenda and national defense action to bring the end of Israel's existence. They don't say, by the way, that Iran will do it. That Iran should strive that Israel will end its existence. With the new set of enemies came a new strategy. Defeat Israel's society, not its military. That's an indirect war, the asymmetric war. And this is to achieve by the gradual erosion of Israel's society's resilience and readiness to withstand by eroding its willpower, by round after round of what we call hybrid war. And here I have to digress a little and explain what is hybrid war. This is the name we gave it. Let's not call it this name. Hassan Nasrallah was the elector from Hezbollah, the leader of Hezbollah, said, we have devised a new type of warfare that is unlike anything. Well, it's not exactly unlike. It has a lot of Mao, a lot of Giap, a lot of other things, as asymmetric wars, but it's a particular variant of asymmetric wars. This was his words. And the basic underpinning theory here is the theory of cultural imbalance. Liberal democracies in each of these includes are weak. Why? Because they cherish human life. This is a sign of weakness. We, the Islamists, the Easterns, we are strong because in their own words, they embrace death. That we are not afraid to die. We are heroes. Because of that, we always win. Because we have the willpower to win, and the other side doesn't have the willpower. You give sufficient loss to any democracy, Israel, and the United States, France, whatever, they are squeamish and they'll stop the war. This is the body bag theory, which we heard many times. Hybrid war is a positional war. The practices of hybrid war don't develop air forces, they don't develop force of maneuver. What they developed is two arms. First, an indirect fire capability, tremendous indirect fire capability from their own territory, and access denial capability with most modern access denial weapons, like anti-tank weapons of the best kind, anti-aircraft weapons of the best kind. The idea of hybrid war is more or less like your bullfight. You have the picadors annoying the bull and making it furious by, this is the indirect fire, it causes a lot of losses, and force him to charge at you. And they prepare the charge with a very sophisticated sword in order to kill the bull. The measure of effectiveness of their war is the number of deaths, not casualties, deaths among the civilians and the soldiers of the other side. In fact, Hassan Nasrallah, during the 2006 war, said, I don't measure my achievement by the number of kilometers I defend, but the number of dead in the Israeli military forces. The cognitive battlefield is of paramount importance. Here it ties up with the propaganda war. The cognitive battlefield is important on one because of many reasons, but one of them is this, the internal front. This hybrid war, part of which I don't have the time to go out, is called the Mukawama. That means the Mukawama is an eternal war until victory. They translate it to resistance in French in order to elicit the images of fighting against the Nazis. It's nothing to do with that. It means constant war until victory. That means it doesn't have to be now. It doesn't have to be in 30 years. It could be the next generation or the next generation. But in the end, we'll win. And the main thing in every battle is not whether we win it or we lose it, but that we fight it. But this thing needs some, people can't fight for no hope of winning ever. So you have to show that you are successful. You have to show achievement. What they do in the cognitive battlefield is they turn every event into a victory, no matter what happened. If they are constantly humiliated, like 2014 was a humiliating defeat of the Hamas. They started the war with the aim of taking the siege and all those, and ended it by begging for a ceasefire, but they celebrated victory, always celebrate victory. So it's part of the cognitive battlefield. Going to the cognitive battlefield, and that ties up with the physical battery, so it's few words about the cognitive battlefield to widen a bit of what Mr. Yamini said. It goes to several fronts. One is the counter-national identity. Israel is a national state. The national state is based on recognition, feeling of nationhood. So this is now being contested, especially in academy and Europe, on 3 counts. First, contesting the legitimacy of nation state. I think you're familiar with that too here in Catalonia, that no place for nation state in the world, and the demand of Israel as a nation state is obsolete, and Israel shouldn't demand it. Contesting the existence of Jewish people. There are no Jewish people. What we have today, we call them Serbs, but this is an invention. And contesting the linkage between Jews and the land of Israel. It's nothing to do with that. So this is one part, and this is mainly academy and the media. The legitimations, BDS, which Mr. Yemeni spoke about, and the leveraging the UN and its institution, like the Human Rights Council. Human Rights Council is dealing with the ills of the world, of human rights, violation of human rights. 50% of their decisions are about Israel. So it's nothing else is happening in the world except Israel, but because this is part of the work of the Begin-Sadat, and the linkage between the physical and cognitive battlefield is the policy of embedding the assault weapons inside highly dense population centers. You can see some pictures here. This is rockets fired from Gaza. Again, where is the, okay, there it is. You see here, you can actually find exactly the street number, the street and the number. And this is an interesting picture. This is a hotel in Gaza. Believe it or not, in Gaza, which is dying of hunger and so on, there is a 5-star hotel for the journalists and for the VIPs, with swimming pool and a place from which rockets are fired. You can either go to the swimming pool and go and see here during the war, you can see the rockets being fired for that. This is an intentional policy because we don't dare return fire and destroy the launching site. And of course, the whole propaganda war that Israel is the Goliath. You saw the picture of Israel, a country which cannot write its name on, but we are the Goliath, and the poor Palestinians are the Davids. I will now focus on the main military threat on Israel is the missiles and indirect fire missile rockets and UAVs. And here I need to bother you with some vocabulary, because there is a great confusion with all those names. There are ballistic missiles and rockets. Let me try to simplify it with you. Every missile is a missile, whether it's a rocket or a missile or a ballistic missile. But those that go up vertically and then have electronics to arc away and find their targets are called ballistic missiles. For some reason, there is no Webster dictionary, and those, like on the right-hand side, which go from launching from a tube and are directed like a gun by where they are directed and how they are elevated, they are unguided, no electronics, are called rockets. But to confuse everyone, the Russians called all the space launchers, which weigh 500 tons, rockets. So, but say no Webster dictionary. This is my dictionary. Ballistic missiles are with guidance, rockets are without guidance. And then there are the UAVs, and what's an unmanned vehicle? It's simply an aircraft without a pilot. It's either automatic or pilot from below. On the right-hand side, when it has, on the left-hand side, there's a propeller, so it's called a UAV. And on the right-hand side, it has a jet engine, so it's called a cruise missile. It's nothing to do with a missile. A cruise missile is a misnomer. It's a UAV, unmanned air vehicle. So these are all the names. There is also the name drone. Drone is the quadrupters that you buy in Amazon or in your duty-free, but you can do military things with it too, although it's limited, it's electrical, so the range is limited. But the confusion here is between drones, unmanned air, I call all of them unmanned air vehicle. This simplifies things. So going to a short history of the missile threat on Israel, the ballistic missile threat, it started in Egypt in 1962 when Gamal Abdel Nasser already used German scientists in order to build ballistic missiles in Egypt. It failed. Egypt didn't have the infrastructure to support such a program. In the 80s, Egypt went again into this with the aid of European companies and financed by Saddam Hussein, built an interesting, a very advanced missile that was frustrated. It was in Argentina. The Argentine did the testing. The US told the Argentine to stop, and the Argentine stopped, and the program stopped too. In Syria, started a massive purchase of Scud missiles with chemical warheads. Then in 91, Israel was actually attacked by ballistic missiles, 40 ballistic missiles from Iraq during the Gulf War, which didn't cause much damage in Israel because they were very, very, very inaccurate, but caused a lot of dislocation and a loss, actually almost hold up of the economy for about 3 weeks. The economy kind of didn't shut down, but went into a slow motion. It was a shock. It was a real shock for the leadership of Israel. And because of that shock, following that shock, for the first time, a missile defense program, which is quite an expensive program, a foray into new technology, was authorized among much discussion by traditionalists. This is against the national security doctrine of the early warning, deterrence and decision, no defense. Don't put money in defense. The way to defend is to attack. So all this was quite a discussion, very, very bitter discussion, but the political leadership, and especially Yitzhak Rabin, decided for going to defense without changing the official defense doctrine. Now, we had on the side a drumbeat of rockets. All the time, from 1968, we started being attacked on by rockets, first by the PLO from the Jordan, along the Jordan Valley. Then the PLO was expelled from Jordan. He went to you can see it on the upper side, to Lebanon. Then it was expelled from Lebanon, so Hezbollah fills its space, started a rocket campaign of its own, which culminated in the Second Lebanon War, 2006, which was another shock. And we have today the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, which are attacking us all the time. We had 3 campaigns, but you don't hear about it. We have campaigns among the campaigns. Just in last November in 2018 and in May this year, 2019, we had quite 2 or 3 full-scale battle days with them, which reached some of the media here. So it's an ongoing background. And here, the Israel National Defense security doctrine was changed for the first time. The shock of 2006, about between 250,000 Israelis relocated from the north to the south in order to escape the rockets. 2 towns were practically abandoned, Nahariya and Kiryat Shmona. In Kiryat Shmona, which is the northernmost city in Israel, even the traffic lights stopped working for the 3-4 weeks of the war. And because of that, the defense establishment decided to update for the first time Ben-Gurion's doctrine and add defense officially in it. And 2 more programs were established, David Sling and Iron Dome. Iron Dome went into action almost immediately as soon as it was deployed. And I want to show you a short script which exemplifies the way we live between peace and war. This is a wedding in Beersheba, November 2012. So there is a wedding. It's in a wedding site, you know. And the siren in the background, the music, the people seems unconcerned to usually. Look at the number of the seconds there. From the start of the siren, the rocket's taking about 1 minute to arrive. So here is the siren going on and the music going on at the same time. this is the reality we are living in. Result of all this rejectionism, the missiles and rockets now are not a nuisance anymore, but really an existential threat with the quality and the accuracy. You saw last month what accuracy can do in Saudi Arabia, although those were UAVs, not rockets, but rockets today can do the same accuracy of within 1 meter. Up to now, it was a terrorist threat. Now it's an existential threat because it can go and hit all our power stations, our desalination plant. Israel's water comes from desalination plants mainly today, and our communication centers. And because of that, we need to change again our policy. And we can do a lot of things against this kind of threat. First, enhance our missile defense. Second, add point defense to our infrastructure. Point defense, either active with small missile defense or passive. Put them underground, because all those things in Saudi were underground, of course they wouldn't have been hit. And add a ground-to-ground precision missile of our own. We have our own accurate missiles, but the cost will be prohibitive. The cost will be amazing, and if we do go into this policy, it will be de facto change of the defense policy, the doctrine of Israel, into warning, deterrence, sustainment, and defense. Offense goes out. It can't do the two things. And if you look at Israel military expenditures over the years, you see them sadly going down. Israel public opinion is not acceptable to that today. So to conclude, the current threat is pushing out towards discarding offense and adding defense. But on the other hand, we cannot discard the possibility that a new Eastern Front will create. Here you see on the map, Iran plus now it controls Iraq and it controls Syria. And this can constitute, in time, although the Iranians are not showing the sign, a new Eastern Front with symmetric, forceful military forces. If we go into the new policy of defense, it will be irrevocable for a long time. You degrade your offensive capability, it takes them decades to build them again. Look at the Russians after the fall of the Soviet Union. So a shift from decision to sustainment is definitely a very heavy decision. We are in this fork of decision now. There is no textbook solution, and in this case, we are writing our own book. Thank you.